Um, I'm Susan, and I'm the teen librarian at DeKalb Public Library. Author Mindy McGinnis, and she is her dog. Talking about Heroine, um, which is the book that's up for the Lincoln Award. Number one, your inspiration for writing the book or any of its characters.
Sure. So I'll start by saying that I never base any of my characters on people in my real life. And that is because I have a very high body count in my books. And if people think that you base a character on them and then you kill them, it really hurts their feelings. So I don't ever base characters on real people. That particular book, I definitely had a moment where things came together. I have an older sister. She's 3 years older than me. She teaches English, and she's 3 years older than me. She's always giving me advice or telling me what to do, however you want to phrase it. And she had read the book called Dreamland by Michael Quinones, which is a really, really good book. And it's all about the opioid epidemic, and specifically related to Southern Ohio, and how parts of Southern Ohio now they're recognized by most people as being kind of the flashpoint, the center of where the opioid epidemic began. And my sister kept telling me, you have to read Dreamland, you have to read Dreamland. And I was like, yeah, okay. I'm not going to, just because she told me to, right? It's like, I'm definitely not going to. I didn't read Harry Potter because she told me to. I was like, no, that's out, just because she said. So I ended up going to a school. There was a parent that had really fallen in love with my first book, and that was a real blessing. And they ended up getting a copy of my very first book, which is called Not a Drop to Drink, in the hands of every 7th grader in their district. And they had me come and talk about that book. And then they were like, while you're here, let's have you go to the high school and talk about some of your other books that are a little more, a little edgy, or something you can't put in front of the junior high kids. And I was like, yeah, sure, let's do that. So I went to this town, and I knew that generally I've been there before. It's a larger town, but it's pretty empty. It's a ghost town. It's a river town. It's a town that thrived on like steel and river trade. So it's dead now, and it's been dead. And it's a town that has, all the public works buildings are from the 1970s. Like, it's all very outdated and kind of leaning toward poverty. So I went down there and met with all the 7th graders. It was awesome. Had a great time. Went over to see the high schoolers. And I always ask, before I begin any type of presentation in front of youth, I always ask the library, the teacher, whatever administrator has brought me there, is there anything going on? Like, is there anything happening in the community? Because I don't want to say something that's going to hit a raw nerve, because I talk pretty freely and sometimes I can make some inappropriate comments. So I'm always asking, what's something that I need to tread carefully around? And they were like, thank you for asking. It's okay. Like, we're glad that you're here. But they said, we actually wanted to let you know that about halfway through your presentation, some of the kids have to get up and leave because they're going to a funeral. And I was like, oh, okay, like, no problem. I totally get it. I understand. When I was a teenager in the 90s, teens died in car crashes. That's how you died. And so I just kind of assumed it. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, was there an accident? And they said, no, it was an OD. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm sorry, And it was their 4th OD that year.
Oh my God.
In the school year.
Oh my God.
Spring, and they had lost 4 students. And I was like, holy crap. I was like, you're kidding me. And they were like, no, it's really bad here. So one of the students, a young woman, wanted to speak to me before she left because she was going to the funeral. And I was like, yeah, sure. So we chatted a little bit, and I was like, man, I'm really sorry. Like, that sucks. This is terrible. And she said, yeah, it is. And she told me that she was a senior. Herself and another group of girls had decided that for their prom dresses, they were just going to wear very simple, reusable little black dress type sets so that they could have good clothes for funerals.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like that's where they were. They knew that they were going to be going to more funerals, and they were just trying to use their money appropriately for wear. And I was just like, oh man. And like, it just like that hit me right in the heart that they're planning their prom dresses, making them accommodated for a funeral because they know there's more. And I was just like, wow. And then I got to talking to the staff, and I was asking them, you know, just the different things that were going on in the community. They had also lost many parents. They had a lot of kids that were being raised by grandparents because parents had passed away or were in jail. And they were like, yeah, it's really, really bad here. And this was before the opioid epidemic was big news. This was before you were hearing about it every day. It was just really a punch in the face. So I was driving back home. It was about a 3-hour drive. And I had, there's a really, really good middle grade writer, I believe he's middle grade, named Sid Fleischman, who says that in order to write a story, it's a lot like making a fire. You have to have 2 sticks to rub together to get a spark. You have to have 2 things to make a story. So I knew I wanted to write about the opioid epidemic, and I just kind of put it in the back of my head. I was like, this is a thing I want to write about. But I don't want to just write about an opioid epidemic. Like that, you know, that's the one-lane street. I don't know what else goes with this. Not sure what my other stick is. I'm putting it in the back of my head. So meanwhile, I'm driving home, and I call my sister, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I start telling her about this experience, and she's like, yeah, Mindy, you need to read Dreamland. And I was like, okay, fine. So I did go home, and I read Dreamland, and it was amazing. And really made me, after seeing actual people living in that situation, set me back. And approximately 2 weeks later, I was going to the state softball tournament. I'm from a tiny, tiny town. My class graduated, I think 88 people. And that was in 1997. The class about 2 years ago graduated 68. We are a small town. And our girls softball team for the past like 3 years has been unstoppable. They have been phenomenal. And they had gone to state 3 years in a row. This has never happened. And my niece was the first baseman. So it was just, and I probably have a softball in my chest where a heart is supposed to be. And then Melissa was saying earlier that she played softball in high school. I did too. Loved it so much. Played it co-ed, co-rec, like all the way up into my 30s. I was a catcher. I was a catcher and a first baseman. I got a little too tall to catch anymore. But I got to be like, I played all the different spots on the infield different times and just loved the sport so much. And so, but it was the 90s. Like there wasn't a lot of support for female sports, like even then. And I got to go to this state tournament, which was in Akron, and it was at this huge stadium. And literally the entire town was there. And our girls like run out and take the field, and everybody is standing up and yelling. And when I was in high school, like if someone's boyfriend came to watch us play, he was the best boyfriend that ever existed. Like that was amazing, you know? And here we have an entire town that has come to watch these girls, and everyone is screaming, and like everybody's losing their minds. I got goosebumps. I was just like, oh my God, everyone is here to watch these girls play sports. That's awesome. And all of a sudden, that stick hit the other stick. And I was just like, oh,
there it is.
Opioid epidemic and athletes, female athletes specifically, because I had wanted for the longest time to write a book about a female athlete. But again, I needed that other stick. I needed more than just one thing. So I had those 2 things, and I emailed my agent, and I was like, hey, I've got my next book. And I told her, and she was like, yeah, I think that could have legs. And I wrote a very quick synopsis, and I sent it off to my editor, and they were like, yes, we want this. This is perfect. Because at that time, the opioid epidemic had started to kind of be more of a hot topic, and people were talking about it. They were like, we want this, but we want it now. because usually, generally, you're working about 2 years ahead of time. And so they were like, we want this book to come out now. How quickly can you write it, basically? And I was like, 8 months? And they're like, can you do it in 4? And I was like, sure. So Be Not Far From Me, which I was just talking about with Tess, was supposed to come out in 2018. It was supposed to come out in the fall of 2018, and they bumped it, and they released Heroine first. And so that's another reason why Be Not Far From Me is so close to my heart, is that I waited for like 3 years for it to finally go to print. But yeah, that was where Heroine came from. That was its genesis. Its origin was that school visit, and then watching my niece and her girls play. And yeah, it was you know, serendipity.
I talked to an adult patron yesterday, and she said that your book won some kind of like the most devastating first line of any book ever.
Yeah, I pride myself on the first lines because it's imperative. Like my first lines, I really want them to punch you right in the throat. And all of my first lines, that's always the goal, is just shock and awe. So I get that. I get that a lot about the first line in Heroine. That and the first line in my book, The Female of the Species, which is, this is how I killed someone. And when I use that one, people are just like, when I do writing workshops with large groups, I always have some great first lines, and I don't just use mine, I use other people's books as well. And that one always, I spent some time with that one.
I really enjoyed the book, and I was a softball player in high school, and I was a catcher on the softball team, and I teach health education now, and I talk a lot about the, you know, drug use and all that kind of stuff in my classes. So there were lots of themes going on in here that I think I read it in 2 days, and you know, that's while doing all of my work other than that. So sleep was non-existent that weekend, but it was okay because it was really good.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I have talked to a lot of my fellow teachers that do a lot of reading. Working at a high school, we do a lot of like the Lincoln, this is on it, the Lincoln do, and I had a few students even at the high school that were, you know, really impressed and got a lot out of it too. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. We were just speaking before people started to join about whether my readers are primarily teens or adults, and like my perception is that it's kind of half and half.
There's 3 different types of drug dealers, which Mickey is dealing with. We've got Edith, and then Patrick, and Edith's friend. I'd like to talk a little bit about, are those particular types of characters people that you imagined drug dealers to be? And which type of those 3 is the most dangerous in your opinion?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about it is that I lifted that concept directly from Dreamland, which is nonfiction. And they had, you know, retrospectively done a lot of work in figuring out how this began. And it seems, again, everyone should read Dreamland. It is fascinating. But in the late 90s and the early 2000s, so one of the things about Heroine is that I definitely smudged timelines, because some of the drug culture references and things like Edith being the primary drug dealer, that would have been more like end of 90s, early 2000s. And some of the references, like with the stamp bags and stuff, with the stuff that she buys off the guy at the truck stop, that's definitely more like early 2000s. And I did this because I had to be very careful writing a book about heroin for teenagers, so that I'm not writing a how-to. Right. Right. So I smudged some things as far as a timeline would go. But in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Oxycontin in particular was not really under the eye of the FDA or the general public or the media. It was highly prescribed. It was overprescribed, and it was prescribed a lot of times to older people that have pain, generalized pain, and they can afford it because they're on Medicaid. So they would get their prescriptions. Some people would get their prescriptions filled, and a Oxycontin street value is $1 per milligram. So if you have an 80 milligram pill, that pill is worth $80. And so these people that might, they're retired or they don't have that much income or their social security isn't that much, they can go get a free bottle of pills that's worth, $1,600 pretty easily.
Gosh.
And then they can sell it. And one of the things that I read about, again, in Dreamland, that was really my cornerstone for research. However, I did read extensively, and I can tell you more about some of the books that I read. But one of the things that they were talking about in Dreamland is that this particular city that was the focus in Ohio, that was the focus of the Dreamland book, at one point, so many people in the community were using Oxycontin for trade, because it was easy to do math. A 20 milligram pill is worth $20. That they didn't have enough cash flow in the community. There literally wasn't enough cash moving around to keep businesses up and to prop up the economy, because everybody was trading in pills.
Wow.
I it's fascinating. Again, I keep hitting on that book. It's called Dreamland. It's by Michael Quinones. It's stunning.
I liked this part. At the end of chapter 23, Mickey says, "Right now, I'm not me, and I'm so damn happy. How is the Oxy allowing her to be someone she's normally not?"
I think for me, when I was writing it, it was important to me that, basically, when you look at, I learned a lot about addiction and addicts, but also mental illness, depression, anxiety, trauma in particular, and anxiety, and just a general feeling of almost existential angst. Like, I don't fit in, I don't belong here, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know where I'm going. Like, those feelings of inadequacy. We all have them, some of us to a much larger degree. But I think for Mickey especially, she even speaks about not feeling like a female very often. Feel feminine, because she's big. She's big and she's strong, and it's one of the reasons she's attracted to the guy that's a basketball player. He's just bigger than her. And she's like, oh, finally, I'm a man that's taller than me, and it actually makes me feel like a girl. And I can relate. I'm not that tall. I'm 5'9", but I was 5'9" when I was in 6th grade. I was hit puberty and kept on going, like in 6th grade. And so when I meet people in real life, I tell them, this is what I looked like in 6th grade, like boobs and all, everything. All there. And that was not cool in 6th grade.
No.
Boys didn't think that was neat. They thought it was terrifying. And it was just, like I said, I grew up in a very, very small community. So basically, and this of course is my interpretation of things, but it's like looking back on that time, like junior high, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, it was like, oh, Mindy's scary, right? And that just, when you're with a very small group of people, that doesn't change. Like that perception is like, Mindy is big and scary. Like that stays. So even though the guys get taller than me and the guys get bigger than me, it doesn't matter. I'm still scary. So I just very much grew up feeling non-feminine because I was strong and because I was big and because I was athletic. And things are different now, thank God. But like back then in the 90s, I definitely was like, how do you be a girl? Like, I don't know how to girl. And I think that that's still prevalent. Not as much, thankfully, but it is still there. And a lot of those feelings for Mickey you know, or my own experiences. And so she finds out that when she takes this oxy, she literally actually feels pretty, like for the first time. She's comfortable in her own body for the first time in her life.
Oh my
And
goodness.
that is just transformative. If you've never been comfortable in your body for whatever reason, when you hit suddenly confidence, it's just like, oh wow, cool. And you can hold your head up and you can walk around and be like, check me out, like no matter what. And
Right.
it took until I was probably 28 until I figured that out. And with the help of Oxycontin, you know, it took away her inhibitions and it took away her anxieties. But also, you know, it's kind of buried in the text, but she has trauma in her past. She is adopted and she has scars that she doesn't remember getting. And, you know, some things happen to her that she may not actually be able to put words to, but she's very aware that she was adopted. And she's very aware that at her genesis, at her beginning, someone didn't want her. And she was harmed and she was hurt because of it. And trauma plays, it's almost a cornerstone of addiction. Not always, but the vast majority of the time, if you have an addict, there is some sort of trauma in their past. And that trauma is a seed that has sprouted so many different branches. And, you know, for Mickey, part of that is her uncomfortability in her own body. And when she takes that oxy and it's gone, she's just like, this is magic.
Yeah, if only we could all find something that would not be addictive, but would allow us to just get out of our own heads for a while. At the end of chapter 54, Lydia says, Mickey, you're still my hero. And this makes Mickey smile. What do you think Lydia meant? Could you just dive right into that one, Mindy?
Yeah, I'd actually like to know what Marissa thinks, her having been a softball player.
Well, I think that Mickey is as much as she has her anxiety and her, all of her limited confidence that she has in herself, she knows that she's a good player. Obviously, she knows this. She knows that she has had a lot of success on the field. Her adoptive parents, though she questions their like backing for her, or like, why am I here? That kind of stuff. She questions all of that. I think she in the back of her mind knows that she has a lot of good qualities, but she's having a hard time accepting those, as kind of that, how do I be humble and accept what I have and appreciate that. I actually, it's funny in reading this because I had the team that I was on when I was in high school. We were one of the best softball teams. We had just consolidated. I was also from a very small town. My 8th grade graduating class, we had 24 kids. And then we consolidated with 2 other school districts, and my high school graduating class had 88 kids. Yeah. So our softball team, the year that I was a senior, we ended up being conference champs and all of that kind of stuff. And there were 4 of us that were seniors that year. And one of my friends, she actually went on to play volleyball because, back then you played all the sports.
You played everything,
yeah. But she went on to play volleyball, and she was just an amazing athlete. And sometimes when I was reading this, I kind of was picturing her, like if this would have happened to her kind of thing. And as much as Mickey has a hard time appreciating all of those strong things that she has going on and how she is, again, when you step on the field as a player, all of your like inadequacies that you feel you have in other places, it's almost like you're in a dream state, just stepping on that field. Like it's your home, it's your place, it's your, like, I can do whatever I want here because I like power through this and I'm really strong. And so I think what Lydia is saying to her is, even though you don't understand, it's that whole idea of, you think to the world you're just one person, but to one person you may be the world. And it's that it's that mentality again that Lydia's trying to point out to her, like, you know, you are so strong and you have no idea. You have no idea how much people look up to you and how much really a role model you are, because
Yeah.
she was like like Susan was saying, so wrapped up in your head, you know, that like get out of that thought process. So
Yeah.
and she's young, you know, she's young and she doesn't have experience and in much experience with having people looking up to her and kind of telling her that she has all those strong suits. So she's just going on those experiences she's had of somebody didn't want me when I was a baby to, you know, am I accepted off the field? I'm not really accepted by my social,
Yep.
you know, peers. And so it's definitely teenage growing up and finding yourself is tough. And Mickey struggles with that. So I think Lydia is just trying to help her realize and see and say, hey, you have no idea how strong you really, really are to everyone else. So
Yeah. And she's a linchpin for the team. Like she really is. And you know, it's so true because I mean, I agree entirely. And I think I even have a line in the book about like you walk onto the field and it's all the field now. It's all this game.
Oh yeah.
You're nothing else matters. It doesn't matter. You're here for the next 2 hours and you're doing this thing and you're doing it with these other people and you have an assigned goal and you have an assigned enemy and you're gonna go and you guys know the rules and now you go, right? And it's just so hyper focused and also such a team experience when you do that team building when you're in those intense like physical and emotional situations with other people, especially in a small town. Most of the time you've played ball with these girls for 12 years. So I mean, you guys, even if you're not friends off the court or off the field, it's like when you're in, you are in and you are sisters and you're gonna go do this thing together. And I think that team like kind of bro culture, girls have it too. Like we have it pretty hardcore. And so like I wrote locker room scenes because we have our own locker room things going on. And I always see like the bro culture thing. And I do love it. Like it's not a slam because I feel it. Girls have it too. We have our own version of that. And I actually, one of the best compliments I've ever received, I got an email from a softball coach. And she was like, man, you really nailed a girl's locker room. And I was like, that makes me feel good.
Whenever you're ready, Mindy, you could tell us a little bit about how you write for strong female characters.
I grew up in the 90s. I was a teenager and a teen in the 90s, but I was a kid in the 80s. I was born in 1979. So I grew up with not a whole lot of strong female characters to look up to. I mean, there was Wonder Woman and like that was kind of it. I had my underoos and I ran around in my Wonder Woman underoos and really thought that was the best thing going. And Wonder Woman's great. Like, don't get me wrong, Wonder Woman's awesome, but she is also running around in her underwear. So, you know, there's something else going on here. And I just remember growing up with all of the fairy tales and all of the, you know, folk tales, and everything was a damsel in distress all the time. And always when I read a book, and there wasn't YA when I was growing up either, it didn't really exist. But when I read a book or saw a movie or anything like that, you know, rescuing a girl was always a pretty big part of the storyline. Or a dog. That was kind of the two things. But those were the two big things in the storyline. And what I wanted to do, and the characters that I associated with most personally, was the person that was doing the saving, the person going through the peril, the person doing the action, the active person that was out there. They didn't necessarily have to be a hero. I mean, that's always cool. But I was always interested in more or less inserting myself and viewing myself in the hero character in the active character, and it usually wasn't a girl. When I was growing up, it just wasn't. You might get a snarky sidekick that was a girl. You might get a villain that's a girl, but she's usually going to be sexy and dressed provocatively, especially if she's a villain. And there's always going to be like sex involved. So that's demeaning in its own way. And I really, you know, internalized all of these things when I was a kid, to the point that I remember when I was young, I did not, very young, like maybe 3 or 4. I remember not understanding basically genitals. Like I didn't understand that boys and girls were different because I had an older sister, but that was it. And I didn't understand that, you know, we were made differently. And I thought, like I truly thought that when you grew up, at some point, someone asked you, do you want to be a boy or a girl? And you made the decision. And then, like, I don't know what I imagined it, but I just imagined someone asked you this questions, you made the decision, and then you grew up as a man or a woman. And I just distinctly remember thinking about this scenario I had created for myself as like a 4-year-old. Well, I'm going to be a boy because they have fun. And that was just where I was at. I was like, obviously, I would rather be a boy because I want to ride the horse or the motorcycle, and I want to catch the bad guy, and I want to punch him in the face. You know, I want to do the things that the boys do. Obviously, I'm a boy. I'm not. I'm a girl, and I love being a girl. But I had to realize that everything I was seeing, and of course, you know, it took me the beginning of my 20s to really start to figure out how deeply culture had affected me as a child. That, you know, it's not just for the boys to go save the day and ride the horse and catch the bad guy and do all the things. You know, girls can do that too. I just never got to see them do it. So when I started to see some representations of that, it was exciting, but it was also like I had weird reactions to it where I was kind of judgy of the girls. I would just be like, well, but she didn't do this right, or she didn't do that right. Or, you know, there was always still a love story, of course. And so I would be frustrated that so much time would be spent on the love, you know, angle, the romantic angle. And I would be like, let's just get to the part where you punch somebody in the face. So I grew up lacking those stories. I grew up lacking these really tough women doing really hard things and not having to have like a romantic side story in order to prop the tale. So, you know, I just grew up that way. And then, of course, became an adult and realized it doesn't have to be that way. And there's plenty of literature out there. And there was, I'm sure, in the 80s as well, with strong women, but I wasn't necessarily exposed to it because it wasn't written for my age range. So I was like, you know, this is what I'm going to write the things that I wanted to read when I was a kid. And I'm going to write the things that I think people still need, and write the things that, another angle that I take with it too, I was a high school librarian for 14 years, and I live very rurally, as I've mentioned. And at the time when I began working in the library in the early 2000s, the books that were really, really popular at that time were very much about rich kids and living in the city and problems that rich kids have. Like, I spilled champagne all over my mom's $10,000 dress that she didn't know I borrowed, kind of stuff. And not that rich people don't have problems, but I work in a school where I have kids that are coming to school without coats when it's 10 below. I have kids that only get to eat when they're at school. I have kids that don't have heat. Kids that sleep with their dogs so that they have enough body heat to make it through the night, kind of stuff. And I was like, you know, they can't relate to ruining your $10,000 dress. Like, there's nothing here for them. And I wanted to write about the places where I live and have grown up. And, you know, another real knee-jerk reaction I have is that whenever I see, for lack of a better word, hillbillies and rednecks portrayed, it's always, it's not, even if it's not negative, it's always a joke. Like, if they're racist, they're sexist, they're stupid, And I mean, there are racist, sexist, stupid people in the country. There's racist, sexist, stupid people in the city too. And so I always became frustrated with the depiction of rural life, and country people. So I really wanted to, I don't know that I don't know that I started out with this as a goal, but it has definitely become one, is that I want to write those like salt of the earth, honest people that aren't like stupid and negligent and like just good people, because those are the people that I know. Those are the people that I grew up with. And I want to write strong women in that culture, because there are plenty. So that's just kind of where I came from in terms of writing strong women. But also, when we use the word strong female character, it has almost become sort of a, it's definitely a cliche, but it's also something that a lot of us that are authors have hit a point where when we hear the phrase strong female character, we just kind of go, oh God. And so it's like, we have to talk about strong female characters again, because we always want to make sure that, you know, strength, it's not just Katniss in the Hunger Games, right? It's not just surviving and you know, being the one to come out on top. Especially for women, strength can be shown in so many different ways. Often when I'm on a panel and I'm asked to talk about writing strong female characters, I tell the story about an ancestor of mine. I do a lot of genealogy, and I'm German and I'm Irish. And on my German side, because the Germans keep amazing records, it has gone all the way back. The tree goes all the way back to the 1500s. And I found a woman living in Germany in the 1500s who was, you know, one of my great ancestors. And I was just looking at all the different records that I had for her and realizing that there was a lot of information about this woman, mostly because so many people in her orbit had died. So not necessarily death records at that point in time, but cemetery records and church records, especially in Germany, were very detailed. So I ended up sitting down with all of the information I had about this woman. And over the course of her life, I believe she had 13 children, and she outlived 12 of them. She only had one of her 13 children outlive her. She lost 2 husbands. Then in the course of putting together the actual dates, I figured out that she had 2 children in her household. I think one was 5, one was 8, die in the same week. So there's probably some sort of illness. Then her teenage daughter died that weekend. And then she gave birth to a baby on that Tuesday. And then the baby died on Thursday. So she lost 4 children. She probably was caring for these children, lost 3 of them, gave birth, lost the baby, and just kept going. And I think she lived to be, I believe it was like 98, which was of course ridiculous in the 1500s. So, you know, when we talk about strong women, and we talk about, you know, what it takes to be a strong woman, I guarantee you this was a villager in Germany in the 1500s. She probably couldn't read or write. She wasn't like super intelligent. She was a housewife, you know, in the 14th century. So she would by no means be what we would call like the strong feminine character, but that's the strongest woman I can even imagine, to bury 12 children, 2 husbands, and just keep going. You know, she still has to make food for the other 8 kids that didn't die yesterday. And it's just like, holy crap. I mean, I was stunned when I sat down with the calendar and looked at what she had been through just in 1 week of her life. I could not do that. I could not absorb that trauma and keep going. And she did. And she was, you know, a German housewife in the 14th century. So whenever I talk about female strength, I always talk about her, because our strength is often understated, underseen, and unappreciated.
I've read one of your books. I read Be Not Far From Me, and I loved it. Like, it's honestly one of my favorite books, and one of the only books that I've like cried to, you know. It was just a really good book, and I think you did a really good job with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I love it when people tell me that they read Be Not Far From Me, because that book, people ask me all the time, like, which character are you most like in all of your books? And the answer is that Ashley from Be Not Far From Me is the character that is the most like me in real life, and definitely the most like me as a teenager and growing up. Even some of the stories from Ashley's childhood are actually from my childhood. So many things. I grew up with, married parents, and, I didn't have a single parent household like Ashley did, but very much a rough and tumble existence. And so Being Not Far From Me is very, very, very close to my heart. And it came out the week before the entire nation went on lockdown, and that was just it was so anticlimactic for me. And for that book, I was supposed to be traveling. I was going to be home the entire month of March, half of April. I had all this promotion planned. Of course, it just all got canceled. I couldn't do any of it, and it really broke my heart, because that book, Being Not Far From Me, is very, very personal. And it's very short. And so a lot of people will sit down and read it in like one go. So that, like, for me, it's the shortest book I've written, but I also think it's very powerful. And it was also one of the most difficult books that I've written, because the entire, like 95, I'd say maybe even 98% of the book is a single character alone in the woods. And that takes dialogue away from you. You're not able to expose any like background or filler or backstory. You don't get any of that anymore, because you have a person alone in the woods. And that was so challenging to write. And I remember just laying in my bed, because I write laying down, laying in my bed, and every day I would sit down like where I was at in the document, and I would just be like, why did you think this was a good idea, Mindy? Why did we decide to write a book with one character alone 95% of the time? And then it was like, well, you did, and they bought it, so you have to write it now. So anytime I get compliments on that book, it is so appreciated.
This kind of ties into what you were talking about like powerful women. I'm sorry I keep talking about this book, but like I said, it's one of my favorite books. So in Be Not Far From Me, Ashley is a very strong woman, and she survives by herself, like using her own knowledge. And but what kind of keeps her going, like in the back of her mind, is kind of like thinking about Davey Beat and what he taught her. So I guess like my question is, what inspired you to write the character Davey Beat, and how is he important to Ashley's survival and her story overall?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Davey Beat is very much, he's not based on like any person that I know, but I remember being young, like being in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, and going to camp, or, seeing like these high school boys and just being like, oh, wow, like, they're men to you, right? Like these are these amazing species of something incredible you've never experienced before. And so Davey Beat really was that to her. He was this, she was in love with him in a very puppy love, childlike way. But I think, that kind of phased and changed into just admiration. And she realized that he could teach her things, and she wanted to learn them. And she was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I get to learn from this guy who is just, to her, a god, like a god of survival in the woods, a guy that can go into the woods with a dagger and build you a house made out of glass while he's in there. Like, just this amazing fellow. So she's thinking about him and thinking about how phenomenal he was. And he has disappeared. He disappeared years earlier. He went into the woods and he never came back out. And so for her, the idea there is like, if Davey couldn't survive in the Smokies, how the hell am I going to? And she does. And like, that's the thing. In the end, is like, God bless him. You know, he's an awesome character, but she realizes in the end, she's actually stronger than her mentor.
Nice.
All the questions. I truly do appreciate you loving Be Not Far From Me.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. It's amazing. Thank you.
I was actually just texting with David Arnold. He wrote Mosquito Land. David's a friend of mine, and we were just texting tonight because we both have books coming out in February. And he said, he was like, you know, he was talking to me about my book that comes out next month, and I said, people are gonna love it or hate it. And he said, that's fine. At least it's a strong emotion either way. He's like, the worst thing someone can say to me is like, yeah, your book was okay. And I'm like, no, you're right. Hate it.
See, and you
hate it, that's fine.
That's right, because your kind of books then with that strong reaction are perfect for book clubs. That would be a very good discussion. Now, Mindy's written several books. We've already started talking about them. And you have your new book that's coming out. You tell us a little bit about that book?
Sure. So my book that comes out next month is called The Initial Insult. And it is all about taking different Edgar Allan Poe short stories. In this case, The Cask of Amontillado, The Fall of the House of Usher, Mask of the Red Death, and The Black Cat. So it takes elements of all of those short stories, but primarily Cask of Amontillado. And I took all these elements from the story. So it's not a retelling. I just pulled elements and I set it in contemporary times. So it's set right now, and it's set in a very rural Ohio town, like in Southern Ohio. So my working title for it was Edgar Appalachia Poe was how I originally referred to it, because it was the best way for me to remember what I was doing. But I'm really excited about it. One of the ways that we started pitching it was Edgar Allan Poe meets the Tiger King, because we have an element of what we referred to when I was growing up in the 90s as a white trash zoo, because we had one where I live. There was a zoo that was very Tiger King-ish and not safe and really quite horrible. And a cougar got out. So there was actually a loose cougar wandering around my hometown for about 3 months. And it was eating pets, like it was eating dogs, it was eating cats. And I don't remember if it was a cougar. I don't remember specifically what it was, but what type of large cat it was a protected species. So you couldn't shoot it. So no one was allowed to shoot it. But at the same time, there was nothing you could do. There was just this big wild cat roaming around. And people would spot it. It actually attacked a jogger one morning. She was okay. Like she made it through. But it was a period of time in my life when I was probably a freshman or a sophomore, where it was like you had to be careful going outside at night because a cougar might eat you. And that was just very strange for where I live. And when I tell people that story, they would always be like, no way. I'm like, no, seriously. So it was just this time in my life that was really interesting. And I can't even really say for sure. Some of my books, I do have like an immediate entry point. I had a thought, I had a dream, I had a conversation, you know, something happened that made me say, oh, that's an idea for a book. I cannot say with The Initial Insult what actually pinged the strobe light that came on. I just know that I was driving home from, I think, the gym, which is where I just left, which is why I look like this. But I was driving home from the gym, and it was about a 7-minute drive. And for whatever reason, I started spinning all these different Edgar Allan Poe stories in my head. And it just occurred to me, it was like, you know, what would that look like today? What if somebody tried to pull a Cask of Amontillado today? And by the time I got home, about a 7-minute drive, I had like everything. And I had pulled elements from all these other stories. And I was texting, not while I was driving, don't do that. But I was texting a friend of mine that is also a writer. And I was like, okay, and what if I did this? And then I tried this. And then I did this. And it was over the course of about a 7-minute drive and 10 minutes of texting with her And she was just like, oh my gosh, yes, oh, that's awesome. And she was getting super excited and fueling me to the point that I was like, I have to write this down right now, you know. And it's like I went to my laptop and just like banged out a synopsis, and everything had just coalesced that quickly. It's a blessing when it happens, and it was a beautiful moment. So I am really excited about that book. I do think that and then the sequel, there are 2 books. The sequel comes in 2022. It's called The Last Laugh. And I really do think they're the best things that I've ever written, and I am super excited for.
Thank you, Mindy, for joining us. This was really wonderful. And I wish you luck. I hope that all your future books do well and that you win the Lincoln Award on March 15th.
That would be awesome. That would make my March 15th.